Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities.
There are people in every family who carry the memory. Not the official memory, not the version that gets written down in books or commemorated in ceremonies or spoken about in formal speeches. The real memory, the private one. The understanding of what a person was truly like, what they truly valued, what they would have wanted, and what they would never have allowed. These are the people who sat closest, who listened longest, who were trusted with the things that were never meant to be made public. And when something begins to happen that feels wrong, that feels like a departure from everything the person they loved stood for, they are the first to know it, and often the only ones willing to say so. Princess Anne is that person in the House of Windsor. She was her mother's closest confidant for the last decades of Queen Elizabeth's life. She understood the Queen not as a monarch or an institution or a symbol, but as a woman with very particular views about what the monarchy was for, how it should be conducted, and above all, what it should never allow itself to become. And on the morning of March 11th, 2026, Princess Anne discovered something that made her understand with a cold and absolute clarity that a plan was being put in place that her mother would never have sanctioned. A plan that, if it succeeded, would reshape the monarchy's relationship with its own history in a way that Queen Elizabeth, had she been alive to see it, would have refused with every ounce of the formidable authority she carried for 70 years. Anne was shocked. And then she was something else entirely. She made a vow. Today we are going to tell you what the secret plan involved, how Anne discovered it, what it would mean for Queen Elizabeth's legacy if it is allowed to proceed, and what Princess Anne, the woman who has given more to this institution than almost anyone alive, intends to do about it. We are going to take our time with this, because this is a story about something that matters far beyond the palace walls. It is a story about who gets to decide what a life meant, and whether the people who were there, who knew the truth of it, have the power to protect it. So settle in, and let's begin. To understand what Princess Anne discovered on March 19th, you first need to understand the context in which the discovery was made. Because the palace in the third week of March 2026 was not operating in calm or ordinary circumstances. It was an institution under simultaneous pressure from multiple directions, managing more active crises than its infrastructure was designed to handle. Prince Harry's court case against the Daily Mail had collapsed in late February when his central witness admitted the evidence was fabricated. On March 4th, Harry's legal team had sent a $59 million bill to the palace. Charles rejected it the same day. On March 9th, Harry's formal proposal for a hybrid return to royal duties had been rejected. On March 12th, Harry had given an interview suggesting the family was choosing not to help him, while privately receiving $2.7 million a year in allowance from his father. On March 10th, Charles had eliminated that allowance entirely. Prince Andrew remained under investigation in connection with the Epstein-related documents that had led to his arrest in February. His situation was unresolved, and his continued presence as a subject of news coverage was a source of continuous reputational strain on the palace. King Charles had, on March 11th, formally transferred final authority over a significant set of institutional decisions to Prince William, a development that those inside the palace understood as a meaningful and probably permanent shift in how the monarchy's internal management was structured. And into all of that, into a palace already stretched to the limits of its crisis management capacity, came the discovery that Princess Anne made on the morning of March 13th, 2026. She had been attending a meeting at St. James's Palace, not an official engagement, a working session with members of the royal household's historical archives team, the staff responsible for the management, preservation, and controlled release of documents and materials relating to the royal family's history. Anne has a long-standing and serious interest in the integrity of the royal archive. She is not someone who attends those meetings for ceremonial reasons. She attends because she considers the stewardship of the family's historical record to be one of the most important responsibilities the institution carries. And because she understood, from her years at her mother's side, that Queen Elizabeth felt exactly the same way. At that meeting, in a document that was presented to those present as a preliminary consultation on a proposed institutional initiative, Anne read something that stopped her completely. A plan. Formal, enough to have been drafted as a consultation document. Significant enough to have been presented to the archives team for their technical input, and consequential enough that, in Anne's judgment, it should never have reached that stage without her knowledge and without a conversation that had not taken place. If you are watching this for the first time and you want to follow this story as it develops, and it is developing quickly, please subscribe right now. We cover the royal family in the depth these stories deserve for people who want to understand what is actually happening. Hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and every new video comes straight to you. Let's talk about what the plan involved. And let's be precise about this, because precision matters when the subject is as sensitive as the management of a monarch's legacy and the documents and materials that define it. The plan, as described in the consultation document, proposed a significant restructuring the way Queen Elizabeth's private papers and personal correspondence are managed, preserved, and, most significantly, made accessible. Royal archives are not like public records. They are not automatically released after a fixed period of time. They are managed privately, under protocols established by the royal household itself, with decisions about what is released, when, and to whom made by the institution rather than by any external body. The monarch's private correspondence, letters to and from world leaders, family communications, personal notes, can be held indefinitely, released selectively, or in some cases, never released at all. Queen Elizabeth's private papers are, by any measure, one of the most historically significant collections of documents in existence. 70 years of correspondence with prime ministers, presidents, world leaders, and family members. Private notes made during state occasions. Personal reflections written in the years after Philip's death. Letters received and sent during the most significant events of the 20th and 21st centuries. The question of how those papers are managed is therefore not a bureaucratic detail. It is a question of immense historical, political, and personal significance. The plan that Anne read in that consultation document proposed, among other things, the creation of a new advisory board that would have input into decisions about which of Queen Elizabeth's private papers are made accessible to researchers and in what form. And the composition of that advisory board, as proposed in the document, included individuals and institutional interests that Princess Anne did not recognise as having any legitimate claim to influence over decisions of that nature. More specifically, and this is the element that sources close to Anne describe as the part that shocked her most. The proposed board included representation from commercial interests, from organisations with financial stakes in how Queen Elizabeth's legacy is presented and marketed to the public. Not historians, not archivists, not constitutional scholars or representatives of the institutions that Queen Elizabeth herself had relationships with. Commercial interests. People whose primary concern with the Queen's legacy was not its historical integrity, but its commercial value. Anne read that section of the document and put it down. And then she read it again, slowly, to make certain she had understood it correctly. She had. Now let's understand why this discovery hit Anne with the particular force that sources describe. Because the shock was not simply institutional, it was deeply personal. Queen Elizabeth had very clear and very firm views about the commercialisation of the monarchy. She was not opposed to the institution engaging with the modern world, or to the royal family maintaining public relevance through the appropriate use of media and communications. She understood that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to connect with successive generations of the public. But she drew a line, a clear, bright, non-negotiable line between the monarchy as an institution of service and the monarchy as a commercial enterprise. Between the appropriate public presentation of royal life and the exploitation of royal identity for financial gain. She had watched, with increasing discomfort, the commercialisation of royal identity that had gathered pace in the years before her death. The licensing of royal images, the merchandising of royal events, the way that royal associations with places, with occasions, with the personal histories of family members were increasingly being treated as commercial assets to be managed for revenue, rather than as elements of an institution that existed to serve rather than to profit. She had spoken about this privately, not in public statements or formal declarations, but in the conversations she had with the people she trusted most. And one of the people she trusted most was her daughter. Princess Anne knows what her mother thought about this. She knows it not from documents or reports or second-hand accounts. She knows it from the conversations themselves, from the specific words her mother used, from the force with which she held those views. And the plan Anne read in that consultation document was, in her judgment, a direct departure from everything her mother had stood for on this subject. A plan to give commercial interests a formal advisory role in the management of the most private and most significant documents Queen Elizabeth ever produced. That is what shocked her, not the bureaucratic structure, not the composition of an advisory board as an abstract governance question, but the implication that the people who would have commercial interests in how Queen Elizabeth's legacy is presented were being given a formal seat at the table where decisions about that legacy would be made. Her mother would not have allowed it. Anne knew it, and Anne intended to make sure it did not happen. Let's pause here. We are at the midpoint of this story, and the section that follows covers what Anne actually did, the specific steps she took after leaving that meeting, and what the vow she made means in practice for the institution going forward. If you are finding this as important as we are, please share this video with someone who cares about the royal family and about the question of who gets to protect the legacy of a life as significant as Queen Elizabeth's. It takes just a moment. Thank you. When Princess Anne left that meeting, because she did not speak to the members of the archives team who remained in the room, she did not make any comment to the staff who had presented the consultation document. She took the document with her, as was entirely within her right as a senior member of the royal family attending a working session, and she left. 2 hours later, she was on the telephone to the King's private secretary, not to Charles directly, an indication that this was being handled as a formal institutional matter rather than a personal family conversation. She requested an urgent meeting. A meeting that would include herself, the King's private secretary, the head of the royal household, and the official responsible for the management of the royal archives. That meeting took place on the afternoon of March 20th, 2026, at Buckingham Palace, behind closed doors. Sources close to Anne's household describe what happened in that meeting with carefully chosen words. They say that the princess was measured, that she did not raise her voice or allow the conversation to become personal or confrontational, that she presented her concerns in the precise, structured, evidence-based way that characterizes how she operates in institutional settings. But they also say that there was no ambiguity about where she stood, no softening of her position, no indication that she was raising a concern that she expected to be partially addressed and then set aside. She was raising a veto. The word used by one source close to her household was exactly that. Anne was not requesting a review of the proposed plan. She was not asking for the composition of the advisory board to be adjusted. She was not suggesting that commercial representation be reduced or balanced with more academic voices. She was saying that the plan, as proposed, was incompatible with the legacy it was supposed to manage, and that she would not accept its implementation. What gave Anne the standing to do this? That is the institutional question that sits underneath the personal drama, and it is a question worth understanding clearly. Princess Anne does not have a formal veto over decisions about Queen Elizabeth's archives. She does not hold a constitutional or legal authority that allows her to block institutional decisions of this kind. If the palace's senior management decided to implement the plan as proposed, they would have the institutional authority to do so. What Anne has, something that operates differently from formal authority. She has the moral authority of the person who was closest to the subject, the person who understood what Queen Elizabeth would have wanted better than anyone else alive. The person whose objection carries for anyone in the institution who understands the history and who takes seriously the obligation to honour the legacy they are managing, a weight that formal authority cannot simply override. Royal institutions are not purely hierarchical in the way that corporate organisations are hierarchical. They carry historical weight. They carry obligations to the past as well as the present. And an objection from Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter, the woman who was with her mother through the decades that produced those papers and those private thoughts, is not an objection that can be dismissed on the grounds of formal authority, without a cost that no one in the institution wants to pay. The meeting ended without a final resolution. The proposed plan was not implemented. It was not formally withdrawn either. It was, in the language of palace bureaucracy, returned for further consideration. That phrase, returned for further consideration, is the palace's way of saying that a proposal has encountered an obstacle that cannot currently be overcome. It is not dead, but it is not moving forward. And in the palace's institutional culture, proposals that are returned for further consideration in circumstances like these have a way of quietly disappearing. Let's talk about why this plan existed in the first place, because understanding where it came from matters as much as understanding what Anne did about it. The commercialisation pressure that produced this proposal did not come from nowhere. It is a reflection of a broader challenge that the monarchy has been navigating for the past decade. The challenge of financial sustainability in an environment where public appetite for the funding of royal institutions is sensitive, and where the opportunities for generating revenue from royal associations are commercially significant. The royal family's finances are more complex than most people realise. The sovereign grant, the public money allocated by Parliament for the official functions of the monarchy, covers the operational costs of the working royal family's duties, but it does not cover everything. The private estates, the personal finances of family members, the cost of maintaining properties that are privately owned, these are funded from private sources, and the management of those sources is an ongoing institutional challenge. In that context, the commercial value of Queen Elizabeth's legacy, the documents, the images, the personal history of a woman who was one of the most significant figures of the 20th century, represents a potentially significant financial resource, one that people within and around the institution have been thinking about for years. The proposal Anne encountered was not, in the view of those who drafted it, a cynical attempt to exploit the Queen's memory for profit. It was, in their view, a thoughtful attempt to create a governance structure that would allow the legacy to generate value for the institution, for the historical record, for the public, in a controlled and appropriate way. But thoughtful intentions do not determine impact. And the impact of giving commercial interests a formal advisory role in the management of Queen Elizabeth's private papers would have been exactly what Anne identified it as: a departure from the principles her mother held, a step toward the commercialization of something that Queen Elizabeth herself had fiercely protected from commercial logic. That is not a departure that Princess Anne is willing to accept on behalf of her mother. And the vow she made in that meeting on March 20th, in the precise and measured and absolutely unyielding way that she operates when she has decided something matters, is that she will not accept it. Let's talk about what happens next, because the story does not end with the proposal being returned for further consideration. Those who know Anne well describe her as a person who monitors, who follows up, who does not accept that a problem has been resolved simply because it has stopped being actively discussed. She will be watching to see whether the proposal reappears in modified form, whether the commercial interests that were represented in the original advisory board composition find their way back into the conversation through a different route. And if they do, those same sources say, Anne will respond with the same precision and the same force that she brought to the March 13th meeting. She is not doing this for visibility. She is not doing this to position herself within the institutional politics of the palace or to make a point about her own standing. She is doing it because, her mother asked her, in conversations that were private and that Anne has never disclosed publicly, to be the guardian of certain things, certain standards, certain principles about what the monarchy was and what it should remain. She took that responsibility seriously when it was given to her. She is taking it seriously now. There is also a broader significance to what Anne has done that goes beyond this specific plan and this specific proposal. In the context of everything that has happened at the palace in the first weeks of March 2026, the authority transfer to William, the Harry situations, the Camilla controversy, the financial decisions, Anne's actions represent something important. It represents the continued presence of a voice in the institution that is not primarily concerned with the current political dynamics of the palace or the management of the current generation's interests. A voice that is oriented towards something older, something that predates the current reign and will outlast it. Queen Elizabeth's voice, in some form, is still present inside that institution. Not because anyone has found a way to channel it or to speak on her behalf without authority, but because the person she trusted most with her private thoughts is still there, still attending the meetings, still reading the documents, still prepared to say with quiet force and absolute conviction that this is not what she would have wanted. Let's end where this story is most human. Not in the archive rooms or the consultation documents or the advisory board governance structures, but in the image that sits beneath all of it. A daughter who has lived her entire adult life in the shadow, and it is not always a comfortable shadow, of one of the most extraordinary women of the 20th century, who gave 50 years of unglamorous, consistent, deeply committed service to an institution that her mother led, who learned what she knew about duty and loyalty and the subordination of personal desire to institutional purpose from watching her mother practice those things every single day. Thank you so much for watching today all the way to the end. If this story moved you, and I believe it will have, because the question of who protects what we leave behind is one that touches all of us, please leave a comment below. Tell us whether you believe Princess Anne is right to take this stand. Tell us whether you think Queen Elizabeth would be proud of what her daughter did in that meeting room on March 20th, 2026. We read every comment, and your thoughts matter to us deeply. And if you are not yet subscribed, please do it now. Click subscribe, turn on your notifications, and we will see you in the next one. Thank you. We will see you soon.